How's it going, everybody? I'm Dave Glavin, an aspiring NBA salary cap strategist, and today I'm going to be discussing the Houston Rockets salary cap sheet. So, since bringing in Ime Udoka, Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, and some other locker room vets like Aaron Holiday and Jeff Green, the Rockets have been on an upward trajectory and should really serve as an example of how to reset a culture, regardless of how they perform going forward. They were bottom of the barrel. They had won 59 total games in the 3 seasons prior to that group arriving. And they've steadily improved to become one of the strongest teams in a really tough Western Conference, finishing with the 2 seed last year. Tough Game 7 loss to a really seasoned Warriors team. And they pivoted by bringing in future Hall of Famer and two-time Finals MVP Kevin Durant, who is quite possibly the easiest player to integrate into any modern NBA offense. So I expect this transition to be pretty seamless. Ime Udoka pointed out in his media day press conference that even at the latter part of his career, Durant's going to bring an entirely different dimension in terms of what they can do offensively, given his shot making ability, particularly down the stretch of games where they really struggled. They didn't have a guy to go to get them a bucket. In this deal, they moved on from Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, the number 10 overall pick, which became Kaman Malawach, as well as 5 second-round picks, which is not nothing for a 37-year-old who has a track record of injury issues. But he's on an expiring deal, and I'll get to that in a second where I think that situation is going to end up. But I anticipate he's going to be in Houston for beyond just this upcoming season. They supplemented this move by bringing in another veteran wing, Durant and Finney-Smith, using most of their non-tax mid-level exception, 4 years, just under $53 million, with the last 2 years actually being non-guaranteed. So this is essentially a 2-year deal. Really like the value that they got for DFS. He's a winning player, and I feel like they're going to have one of, if not the best wing groups in the league. When you talk about him, Durant, Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith Jr., who more of a big, but Tari Eason and Durant Finney-Smith. Ton of optionality with that group, really versatile. They sit roughly 1.2 million below the first apron, which is a hard cap for them, given that they used more than the tax mid-level exception to bring in Finney-Smith. This is an important number given the recent development. Fred VanVleet, torn ACL, going to be out for the season, unfortunately. Really big blow for them. So they're going to have to pivot from their starting point guard, right? They cannot sign a veteran minimum player, given their relation to the first apron hard cap, until late January, given how the prorated vet minimum works. And most of their roster, outside of a couple of the core guys, are not tradable until December 15th, given that they were just re-signed this offseason. So I'll get into how they can navigate this situation a little bit in a bit, but I think they're also going to have the ability, roughly 6.8 million above the tax. They're going to have the ability to duck that if they want. And while it's way too early to tell right now, but I think they're going to do that this year, given that it's close enough where they can just offset when that repeater clock is going to start in a few seasons. And I'm always a fan of delaying that as long as I can. 5 tradable first-round picks, a couple really valuable selections, Phoenix 2027, as well as a potential Phoenix pick in 29. They got 10 tradable second-round picks, $80 million roughly below the second apron to work with in 26-27. I'm treating that as kind of a de facto hard cap just because I don't see a team that really hasn't shown to be a legitimate contender going into the second apron, unless you're Cleveland. I think that's pretty rare. I'm also not a fan of that, but so treating that as a de facto hard cap for them when taking into account what their extensions could look like. Talking about extensions coming up, Tari Eason and Kevin Durant are the 2 big ones for Houston. So starting with Eason, deadline for him is October 20th at 5 p.m. Eastern. That is the deadline for the rookie scale extensions for the draft class of 2022. He struggled to stay on the floor, missed 60 games in 2023-24 season and 25 games last year. For this reason alone, I think there's a better chance than not that a deal doesn't get done. Given the low margin of error that this new CBA allows for larger contracts, there's not a ton of reasons why Houston should risk bypassing the protection that they get from restricted free agency. While there's going to be more teams with cap space next season, a lot of them are teams that I don't expect to make the playoffs this year. And so I don't think they'd be a huge risk of stealing Eason from them. But it is some leverage that Eason's side has in terms of getting a deal done. Their cap sheet is relatively clean over the next couple seasons. They got Şengün at a really good number, right around 20% of the cap through 28-29. He's got a player option for 29-30, which I believe he'll opt out of and be able to re-sign at a bigger number. They just extended Jabari Smith Jr., who I'm not a huge fan of. 5-year deal, a little over $120 million, so that's going to average out at roughly 13% of the cap, a little bit more than that for the duration of that deal. He's been far more durable than Tari Eason, but I'm just not really sure what his offensive role is at his peak. Obviously, still very young and developing, but hasn't shown a ton of shot creation ability. So I think that's a little rich for a third or fourth option offensively. Really good defensive player, but I'd much rather have Tari Eason at a lower number. And I think there is an opportunity to get him on a team-friendly deal this offseason or before the deadline, given his injury history. He's a fantastic defender and rebounder, especially for a wing, and in particular on the offensive glass. He's a monster. He's ranked in the 90th percentile for block and steal percentage every year of his career. And he's a really good transition player, which I think is important when you have a guy like Amen Thompson who's constantly wanting to push the ball up the floor. I think every team could use a Tari Eason. Not that they all couldn't use a Jabari Smith Jr. too. They're both winning players, but what percentage of the cap would a guy like Tari Eason deserve? I think a deal starting at roughly 11% is fair, given his injury history at this point, with standard 8% raises that tops out at 4 years, $82 million. I have as a potential structure here. Comparable deals include what Patrick Williams got, who Tari Eason is a superior player when compared to him. PJ Washington just signed a new extension with Dallas. This is in a similar range. And Herb Jones as well on his 3-year extension with New Orleans. I think these are good comparisons. If he were to not sign a deal this before the deadline here, and he has a fully healthy season, I could see him getting somewhere in the 22 to 25 range. So I think that's an opportunity for Houston now if his side is willing to take a team-friendly deal, given where his injury history has been. There's an opportunity to get a deal done now. It's hard to project what their future cap situation is going to look like without taking into account Durant's next deal. I don't think they gave up what they did for it to just be a 1-year rental. And I think one key to this negotiation is getting him to take below the max and give back a little bit of money so they have flexibility under the second apron. I think these talks are going to drag into the season as the deadline for him is not until next June. So that could also impact the Eason extension as well, being after the season. Whatever the average annual value ends up being for Durant, I expect the structure to be a 1+1, just given his age, to give him some flexibility. But can they get him to take 32.5% instead of the 35% max? That's going to save them roughly $10 million over the course of the, say, a 2-year deal, a 1+1, and give them the flexibility to stay below the second apron and field a full roster, right? So I have him here at a 32.5%, roughly 54 in the first year, player option on the second year, $58 million. That would leave them over $9 million below the second apron to fill out 4 roster spots. So mix of vet minimums and second round picks, which they have 4 of in this upcoming draft. I think a full 35% max would almost certainly guarantee that they're going above the second apron without moving one of the larger salaries or not extending Eason, which Finney-Smith is going to be very movable given the non-guaranteed structure on the back end. So that's something to take into account, but just wanted to note that on the potential Durant extension. As far as Fred VanVleet goes, I don't think they sign anyone based on the comments from Udoka and Rafael Stone. I don't expect them to sign or trade for a guard before the December 15th trade restriction deadline, where almost all the guys that signed this offseason will become available to trade. It sounds like it's going to be a mix of Amen Thompson, Reed Shepherd, and running more actions through Sengun, which is the most appealing option to me. He's not on Jokic's level, but he's a really gifted passer, and I feel like that's an underutilized part of his game. By bringing in Durant, I can see, though, and understand why they would want to have more urgency with this window and get a veteran guard that's capable of running the offense. Couple potential targets, if they were dead set on bringing someone in, are TJ McConnell and Trey Jones. Given their proximity to that first apron hard cap, they would need to make the salaries almost match or send out more than they would take back. And I feel like the latter option would give them more flexibility in case they were to suffer injuries later in the year and avoid a situation like Dallas where they're almost not able to field the roster given that proximity to the hard cap. I don't expect them. I've seen the idea floated to attach any of their valuable first to Fred's deal and go out and get a guy that makes a bit more than a McConnell or a Trey Jones. But it is an option. I'm really excited to see how this team's offense evolves given the additions of Durant and Finney-Smith. And in the absence of Fred VanVleet, we really get to see what we have with Amen Thompson at the one or what Reed Shepherd is capable of running an offense. I appreciate anyone who tuned in. The next video is going to be tomorrow on the Warriors, who finally filled out their roster as soon as training camp started and got a deal done with Kuminga. Thank you.